fertile millionaire dresses like a beggar in search of someone worthy to receive his immense fortune. What happens next will surprise you. What would you do if you had everything but still felt completely alone? James Whitmore, a successful businessman in New York City, found himself asking this question during a moment of deep reflection. He had built an empire in the real estate sector, amassed wealth and power, but as he looked around, loneliness enveloped him like a heavy cloak. What he truly desired was to find someone who saw him as a human being, not just as a billionaire. At over 60 years old and facing a terminal illness, James found himself confronted with an agonizing decision: how to ensure that his fortune would be passed on to someone who genuinely cared for him. Thus, he devised a bold and risky plan to disguise himself as a beggar and discover if genuine kindness still existed in the world. James's majestic mansion in Manhattan, filled with antiques and works of art, reflected his life of luxury, but also his solitude. The view of Central Park, which he gazed at from his office, symbolized the distance between his wealth and his desperate search for connection. He spent hours in his private library, where he confronted memories of achievements and, more painfully, emotional losses that haunted him. Determined to change his trajectory, James swapped his elegant suit for tattered clothes and hit the streets of the city. He blended in with the homeless, observing the daily interactions of New Yorkers, hoping to find someone who would see beyond his appearance. The streets of Lower Manhattan, especially the bustling Union Square, became his temporary new home. There he set up an improvised shelter with cardboard boxes and began to observe life around him, searching for a sign of kindness that would make him believe in humanity. Meanwhile, Emma, a dedicated nurse from Brooklyn, crossed paths with James without knowing who he truly was. Certain that people have more value than their possessions, she approached him with small gestures of kindness, offering food and blankets. James, in his distrust, hesitated to accept her help, but Emma's persistence sparked an unexpected interest in him. What began as a casual encounter turned into an emotional connection that would challenge both of their expectations. On the other hand, Robert, a distant nephew of James, had other plans. Ambitious and manipulative, he coveted his uncle's fortune, even though he had never cultivated a genuine relationship with him. Upon discovering that James was living as a beggar, Robert saw it as an opportunity to get closer and secure his inheritance. He began to plot strategies, always watching from afar, ready to do whatever it took to claim what he believed was rightfully his. As days passed, James felt increasingly drawn to Emma, whose kindness and concern for his emotional well-being touched him deeply. He pondered the possibility of revealing his true identity and making her his heir. However, Robert's plan threatened this new hope. An imminent confrontation loomed, and James knew he would need to face the moral dilemmas that haunted him. As James navigated these complex relationships, his journey became a reflection on the true nature of wealth and what really matters in life. The search for genuine connection and love would lead him to a dilemma that would change not only his destiny, but also that of Emma and Robert. During a tense dinner in the penthouse of his mansion, truths would be revealed, and James would have to decide what it really meant to leave a legacy. The bright lights of Manhattan would witness a decisive moment, where character and financial interests would clash in an emotional battle that would change everything. James, wrapped in his tattered clothes, felt the cold of a New York night seep into his bones. It was a different sensation from those he experienced in his mansion, where central heating kept him comfortable. Now, each gust of wind felt like a reminder of his vulnerability. He wondered if this was the real life he had ignored for so long. The streets, once merely a backdrop for business and opportunity, now revealed themselves as a labyrinth of loneliness, where the indifference of people hit him hard. Emma, with her warm and gentle demeanor, had become a ray of sunshine amidst the darkness that surrounded James's life. She regularly appeared, bringing food and talking to him as if he were a friend, not a stranger in a desperate situation. With each visit, James found himself more intrigued by her, more interested in her life, her stories, and her struggles. He realized that Emma carried her own burdens: the stress of work, the pressure to care for her family, and the desire to make a difference in the world, even if in small ways. For her, helping others was a mission, a way to find meaning in a world that often seemed cruel. On the other hand, Robert's presence loomed like a threatening shadow. Robert was not there to care for James, but to exploit his vulnerability. He often passed through Union Square, observing from a distance like a predator waiting for the right moment to pounce. James already felt distrust growing toward him. What did Robert really want? The old businessman wondered if his nephew had some kind of plan. Robert's unbridled ambition made him a dangerous presence, and James knew he needed to stay one step ahead. The first challenges began to arise when James decided to open up a little more to Emma. During one of their conversations, he started sharing details about his life, omitting, of course, the fact that he was a billionaire. Emma listened attentively, and James felt lighter as he shared his experiences. However, a part of him always hesitated. What if she discovered who he really was? The possibility that Emma might distance herself from him if she knew the truth tormented him. This doubt became a weight in his chest, and with each passing day, honesty seemed like an increasingly difficult barrier to cross. The situation became even more complicated when Robert decided to get closer to Emma. He knew that by becoming friends with her, he would gain indirect access to James. Robert began inviting her for coffee and subtly asking questions about her uncle. Emma, confused, felt flattered by the attention, but was suspicious of Robert's intentions. James, in turn, watched everything in silence, his heart shrinking with each interaction between the two. He didn't want Emma to be manipulated, but he also felt powerless, trapped in his own web of lies. The nights on the streets of New York began to become increasingly challenging. Winter was approaching, bringing with it colder temperatures. James found himself struggling to find shelter and food as his health deteriorated. The illness that tormented him was starting to leave visible marks, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could maintain this facade. With every cough that struck him, a new wave of panic washed over him. He wondered if he was making the right choice by disguising himself as a beggar. Was he truly seeking connection or just punishing himself for his past failures? Emma, noticing James's fragility, began to worry. She noticed he was paler and more tired than usual. She decided that she needed to do something to help him. But with each step she took towards him, James recoiled, not allowing her to see the true extent of his suffering. He was in an emotional conflict, torn between the desire to open up to her and the fear that it would ruin the only genuine friendship he had. Tension heightened when Robert, noticing the growing friendship between James and Emma, decided to act. He confronted James unexpectedly while the businessman was in his makeshift shelter. Robert, with a cold smile, began to insinuate that he knew who James really was and that his charade wouldn't last forever. Robert's words were like blades, cutting deep into James, who found himself trapped between truth and lies. The moral dilemma became unbearable. James had to confront not only Robert's threat, but also his own insecurities. He needed to decide whether he was willing to risk everything and reveal his true identity to Emma, or whether he would continue to hide under the cloak of loneliness and fear. The search for connection was about to transform into a test of character that would challenge not only his inner strength, but also his deepest beliefs about love, friendship, and the true meaning of legacy. The night grew colder, and James felt the weight of loneliness accumulating in his chest. The streets, once a symbol of freedom and adventure, now imprisoned him in a cycle of uncertainties and fears. The unexpected encounter with Robert had left deep marks on his mind, as his nephew's words echoed like a constant warning. He knew Robert was lurking, ready to expose his charade at any moment, and this threat became an unbearable burden. Emma, for her part, was determined to help James, but her concern grew with each passing day. The visits, which had once been moments of joy and story exchanges, began to be filled with an agonizing silence. James didn't fully open up, leaving her confused. What was he hiding, she wondered? What could be happening to him that made him turn into someone so distant, even in her presence? Emma began to investigate, talking to other people who frequented the square. She heard rumors about a man who had been a successful businessman, now living on the streets. But even with this information, she hesitated to make assumptions. The connection they had formed seemed genuine, and she didn't want to break it with unfounded doubts. Meanwhile, James struggled against the growing fragility of his body. The cough became more frequent and his stamina diminished. He found himself forced to hide even more, avoiding any interaction that could expose his weakened health. Each day became a battle, not only against the cold and hunger, but also against the very image he had constructed. He felt like an imposter, and this corrosive self-image slowly consumed him. Robert was not just watching from a distance. He began to infiltrate Emma's life, pretending to be a kind and caring friend. He invited her for coffee, where he talked about his family and casually mentioned his uncle. Robert's manipulations were subtle, but Emma was not naive. She sensed that there was something rotten behind his facade. One day, when she met with Robert, she decided to confront him. "You seem interested in James," she said, with a firm look. "Why is this so important to you?" Robert smiled, but his eyes showed no joy. "Oh, he's just an old acquaintance. But you know, he might need help. Sometimes people like him need a little push to get back on the right path." Emma frowned, suspicious. "What do you mean by people like him?" The tension in the air was palpable, but Robert just laughed as if he were joking. "Just an observation, Emma. Don't worry, I'm here to help." Meanwhile, James, on the other side of the city, felt anguish knowing that Robert was getting closer to Emma. He didn't want her to be manipulated, but he felt powerless to stop it. His heart weighed heavy at the thought that Emma might be disappointed in him if the truth about his life came to light. The idea of losing her terrified him. James's moral dilemma intensified as he began to realize that his health was not improving. He was caught in a vicious cycle of denial and fear, and with each passing day without seeking medical help, the situation became more critical. He remembered the nights he lay in his luxurious bed, surrounded by all the comfort money could buy. Now he was fighting for his survival, and this reality forced him to confront his limitations. On a particularly cold night, as the snow began to cover the streets, James found temporary shelter in a hostel. He sat in a corner observing the people around him. There was an older man who seemed as lost as he was, and two young women who shared laughter and stories. James felt a pang of envy, but also a desire for belonging. He wanted to feel part of something greater, but the barrier of his own shame held him back. That night, Emma decided to visit the hostel, worried about James's health. Upon entering, she immediately spotted him in a dark corner. Her heart raced at the sight of him so thin and pale. As she approached, she noticed he was trembling, not just from the cold, but from the pain he was trying to hide. "James, what's going on? You don't look well," she said, her voice soft but filled with concern. He tried to smile, but the expression on his face was one of despair. "I'm just adjusting. Life on the streets is harder than I thought." Emma sat beside him, holding his hand. "You don't have to go through this alone. I'm here to help." In that moment, James felt a wave of emotion. The comfort of her touch made him question his choice to hide behind a mask of lies even more. But at the same time, Robert's pressure loomed like a dark cloud over them. He was about to make a choice that could change everything, but uncertainty and fear kept him trapped in his web of lies. The clash between truth and lies grew increasingly intense, and James knew a difficult decision was approaching. He needed to confront not only Robert, but also himself, to discover who he truly wanted to be. The path ahead was filled with challenges and twists, and each step would bring him closer to an emotional climax he could never have predicted. The night remained cold, and the biting wind seemed to whisper secrets James was not ready to hear. As he sat beside Emma in the hostel, the weight of his decisions and lies pressed down on his heart. Her presence was a balm, but also a constant reminder of his own fragility. He knew that at any moment, the truth about his life could be revealed, and the thought terrified him. Emma, with her worried gaze, tried to understand what was going on in James's mind. She was there, willing to help him, but there was an abyss between them, an abyss built by secrets and fears. The silence between them was unsettling. James wanted to open his heart, to tell her about his past, about how everything had fallen apart, but the words felt stuck in his throat. Suddenly, the hostel door swung open with a bang. A group of men entered, laughing and talking loudly, breaking the tense atmosphere. Among them, James recognized Robert. His heart raced. Robert's presence was like a thief in the night, ready to steal whatever remained of his peace. Robert walked up to him, a smile that didn't reach his eyes on his face. "Look who we have here, our dear James." His tone was sarcastic, and the men around him laughed as if they were watching a play. Emma turned to James, her expression of confusion transforming into concern. "You know him?" James merely nodded, fear overtaking him. Robert leaned in closer, as if he wanted to whisper a secret. "I hope you're taking care of yourself, James. Don't forget that you can't hide forever. The truth always finds a way to surface." The tension in the air was thick. James felt his breath quicken. He wanted to get up and leave, but Robert's words held him captive. He knew he couldn't run from the truth forever. The life he had built around lies was about to crumble. "You don't need to worry about him, Robert," Emma interjected, with a firmness that surprised James. "James is my friend, and I don't like the way you talk to him." "Friend? That's interesting," Robert replied with a condescending look. Just be careful, Emma. You might get hurt getting involved with people who aren't what they seem. Robert's words cut like a knife. James felt the weight of shame increase. He didn't want Emma to see him as a failure, as someone who had nothing to offer. Her gaze, which had once been filled with concern, was now tinged with doubt. He took a deep breath, fighting against the wave of emotions that threatened to bring him down. Robert's unexpected revelation that he could be unmasked at any moment shook his foundations. A part of him wanted to scream that he was more than that he had dreams and hopes, but another part felt paralyzed by shame. "I'm not who you think I am," James finally murmured, his voice trembling. I'm trying to find myself again." Emma looked deeply into his eyes, and James realized she was starting to understand, but at the same time, the shadow of doubt loomed over them. He didn't want her to pity him, but it was inevitable that the truth about his life would begin to surface. With each passing second, the image he had constructed was unraveling. The atmosphere in the hostel shifted dramatically. The laughter of the men became a distant echo, and the conversation around them transformed into a monotonous buzz. James felt as if he were on a stage, exposed to the light of truth. He looked at Emma, hoping to see support, but what he found was an expression of uncertainty. "James, what are you hiding?" Emma asked, her voice soft yet firm. "I want to help, but you need to be honest with me." The question struck him like a blow. He knew the moment to confront his flaws had arrived. The weight of his life as an imposter crushed him. He thought of the nights he had sat on his luxurious bed, surrounded by wealth and success, and how all of that now seemed so distant. What did success really mean? He had traded his dignity for a bit of comfort, and now he was there, in the shadows, struggling to reclaim what he had lost. James's heart shattered. He realized he was not only hiding from Emma, but also from himself. The life he had chosen, full of lies and illusions, was not the one he truly wanted to live. It was time to put the masks aside. He took a deep breath, facing Emma. I don't know how to explain all of this right now, but I need to try. I want to be truthful with you. I am not who you think I am. I was a businessman, a successful man, but I lost everything. And now I am here lost. I don't know how to start over, but I need to try." The confession came as a relief, but at the same time, he knew that opening up meant facing the consequences. Emma looked at him, and for a moment, the silence between them was profound. There was pain, but also a spark of hope. James felt that perhaps this was the first step toward true recovery, not just of his health, but of his soul. He needed courage to face what was to come, but above all, he needed Emma's friendship to help him find his way. James's confession hung in the air like a heavy cloud, threatening to burst at any moment. Emma, for a moment, remained silent, absorbing every word he had spoken. Her expression shifted from confusion to compassion, but there was also a hint of concern. James realized that the truth not only freed him, but also brought with it a series of new challenges. After the revelation, the atmosphere in the hostel seemed to have changed. The laughter and conversations of the men who had entered had dissipated, and the tension between James and Emma had become palpable. He felt that the weight of his past now extended to her, like a shadow that couldn't be ignored. The idea that Emma might pull away from him terrified him even more. He did not want to be a burden, but he knew that honesty could be a path to healing, even if it was difficult. "Did you really lose everything?" Emma finally asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes," James replied, the pain in his voice undeniable. "It was a big business, and I let greed take over. I thought I was doing well, but everything collapsed in an instant." Emma shook her head as if trying to comprehend the magnitude of the situation. "And what will you do now?" She seemed genuinely concerned. James noticed the sincerity in her gaze, but it only intensified his anguish. He did not know the answer. The truth was, he was lost, unsure of where to begin again. He had grown accustomed to living in a world of superficialities, where success was measured by material possessions and status. Now, without any of that, he felt vulnerable and exposed. What did he have to offer someone like Emma? "I don't know. I need to find a job. Something that will help me get back on my feet," he said, trying to sound confident, but the insecurity showed through. "But I don't know where to start." Emma seemed to reflect on his words. "You have skills, James. You can start over. It's not easy, but you are not alone. I am here." Her words were a balm, but James felt as if he were on an emotional roller coaster. He wanted to believe that he could start over, but reality pulled him down. The memories of his past, the business meetings, the luxury, and the feeling of power were still fresh in his mind, like an echo of a time that seemed so distant. Soon, Robert and his group began to walk away, but not before casting one last contemptuous glance at James. "Good luck, James. You're going to need it," he said with a sarcastic smile. The words echoed in his mind like a grim warning. The insecurity that had already consumed him was now fueled by this menacing presence. What else did Robert know about him? What secrets could be revealed? After the men left, the hostel returned to an air of normalcy, but James felt that everything had changed. He and Emma were closer, but the chasm he had created with his lies still existed. He needed to confront it. They sat in a corner of the hostel, and Emma took his hand, a simple gesture but one that meant a lot. "James, can you tell me more about what happened?" Emma asked gently. "What led to your collapse?" He hesitated, the memories flooding his mind. I let ambition consume me. Work became everything to me, and when things started to go wrong, I didn't know how to handle it. I thought I could control everything, but the truth is I was just running in circles." Emma watched him closely, and he felt that she truly cared. "You are not a failure for having fallen. Many people go through this. What matters now is how you get back up." Her words resonated in his mind, and he began to see a small light at the end of the tunnel, but fear still accompanied him. What if he failed again? What if Robert decided to expose his past? The night continued to be cold, and James felt a shiver. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, full of obstacles and uncertainties. The internal struggle he would face would not only be against the shadows of his past, but also against the doubt that might arise in Emma. He wanted her to believe in him, to see beyond his history of failures. As he sat next to her, a new determination began to blossom within him. He could not change what had happened, but he could shape his future. He would have to confront his fears, one day at a time, and more importantly, he would start doing that alongside Emma. The new journey would not be easy, but with one step at a time he was ready to face the truth and seek recovery. James sat beside Emma, feeling the warmth of her hand holding his. In that moment he realized he was no longer alone. The connection that had formed between them was stronger than he could have imagined, and it encouraged him to keep going. The pain of his past was still present, but there was something new blooming within him, a desire to rise up, to face the challenges that lay ahead. The next morning, James woke up with renewed determination. He knew the journey would not be easy, but he was willing to take the first step. Instead of sinking into negative thoughts, he decided to seek job opportunities. He remembered skills he had acquired over the years that could be useful. With a bit of courage, he began looking for openings at local companies. Emma supported him at every stage. She accompanied him to a few interviews and helped him revise his resume. Her encouragement was like a beacon in the storm that still surrounded him. James began to feel more confident. Each no he received did not discourage him. Instead, it made him strive even harder. He started to understand that failure was part of the learning process. In time, James found a temporary job at a small marketing company. The environment was different from what he was used to, but the simplicity of the tasks helped him rediscover his value. He realized that he no longer needed to be at the top to be happy. Success was no longer measured solely by material possessions or status, but by the satisfaction of doing something that truly mattered. He dedicated himself to the work diligently, learning to appreciate each small progress. As he worked, James began to reflect on the lessons life had taught him. He realized that unchecked ambition had led him to a breakdown, but that same ambition was now directed toward a greater purpose, rebuilding his life and helping others. He started participating in community groups where he shared his story and listened to others. This exchange of experiences helped him understand that everyone faces difficulties and that vulnerability can be a strength. Emma was also in a phase of growth. She had her own challenges, and the friendship between them deepened as they shared their fears and hopes. James realized that friendship was not only a form of support, but also an opportunity to learn from others. Emma taught him about empathy and understanding, showing that everyone has their battles. As the weeks went by, James began to see changes in himself. He had become more patient and less critical of himself and others. The shadow of his past was still present, but it no longer dominated him. He started to accept help from Emma and others around him, which brought him a new sense of community. He realized there was no shame in needing support. In fact, it made relationships stronger. One day, while walking alongside Emma, he turned to her and said, I never thought I could feel gratitude for having lost everything. But now I feel that this experience has taught me so much about who I am." Emma smiled, and he felt warmth in his heart. The transformation was not just about finding a new job, but about rediscovering himself and understanding that true success came from within. James still had a long way to go, but now he knew he had the tools to face it. He learned to be kind to himself and to value every small step. Life was not a destination to be reached, but a journey full of lessons. He committed to applying the lessons he had learned, not only for himself, but to help others who were in similar situations. As they walked together, James and Emma laughed and talked about their plans for the future. He knew that no matter what happened, he had someone by his side. Their friendship had become a source of strength, and together, they were ready to face any challenge that life presented them. James finally understood that true wealth lay not in possessions, but in the connections we create and the lessons we learn along the way. James had always known that life could be challenging, but he never imagined he would face his greatest test on an apparently ordinary day. As he prepared for an important presentation at the marketing company, a wave of anxiety washed over him. It was the first time he would have the opportunity to present a campaign he had helped create. What should have been a moment of celebration turned into a nightmare when suddenly, one of his colleagues, a man named Lucas, began to aggressively question his ideas in the meeting. Lucas's words cut like knives. He was not just questioning the campaign, he was attacking James personally. Memories of his past failures came rushing back, and insecurity enveloped him like a heavy cloak. James felt his heart race, and the voice in his head screamed that he was not good enough. In that instant, he found himself on the brink of a breakdown, the same breakdown that had led him to lose everything before. Emma, who was in the room as an observer, noticed the transformation on James's face. She felt her own heart tighten as she watched him struggle with his insecurities. The silence in the room seemed deafening, and James knew he needed to find a way to reaffirm himself, not just for Lucas, but for himself as well. He took a deep breath, and in the midst of the storm of thoughts, a spark of courage emerged. "Lucas, I understand that you have a different opinion," James began, his voice trembling slightly. "But I truly believe this campaign can work. I have dedicated myself to it and thought about every detail. I am not here just to sell a product. I want to create a connection with people." He looked around the room seeking support. "We all have different visions, and that's a good thing. We need to work together, not against one another." James's words echoed in the room, and he felt a small sense of relief as he opened up. The tension was still palpable, but the sincerity in his voice made some colleagues shift in their chairs, showing signs of support. Emma smiled encouragingly, giving James an additional boost. He was no longer alone. He was surrounded by people who believed in him, and that was all he needed. Lucas paused for a moment, surprised by James's response. The aggression in his gaze slowly diminished, and he nodded as if reconsidering his stance. "I just wanted to make sure we did the best job possible," he said, with a less hostile tone. "I'm sorry if I was harsh." The atmosphere of the meeting changed. People began discussing the campaign with more enthusiasm, and James felt the pressure on his shoulders start to lift. He shared his ideas with renewed confidence, and as the conversation progressed, he saw that his vision was being accepted and respected. By the end of the meeting, the campaign was approved, and everyone in the room applauded. James felt a wave of gratitude and relief. He had faced his greatest fear, and in doing so discovered an inner strength he didn't know he possessed. He turned to Emma, who was radiant. She ran to him and hugged him, and in that moment James understood that true happiness wasn't just about professional success, but about having people by his side who supported him. As he left the meeting room, James reflected on everything that had happened. He realized that his past failures would not define him. Instead, they were parts of his journey. He had learned that life is made up of new beginnings, and that every challenge brings a valuable lesson. What truly mattered were the relationships he had built and the experiences that shaped him. As he walked alongside Emma, he felt light. Their friendship had solidified in that moment, and he knew that together they could face any storm that came their way. James looked to the future with hope and determination. He had not only found a new purpose in his life, but also a new understanding of what it meant to be truly successful. James finally realized that success was not just about material achievements, but about growth, connection, and the ability to rise after each fall. The journey of self-discovery he had taken led him to a place of acceptance and gratitude, where there was no fear of failure, but rather the courage to keep trying. And so, with Emma by his side, he was ready to face whatever life had in store for him, knowing he had the necessary tools and support to thrive. After the meeting, James left the office with a mix of relief and euphoria. The approval of the campaign meant more than just a step forward in his career. It represented a victory over his fears. He walked alongside Emma, who still radiated with the positive energy that the meeting had generated. The environment around them felt more vibrant, and the colors of the office walls seemed to come alive, reflecting the internal transformation he was experiencing. "You were amazing in there," Emma praised, her eyes shining with admiration. "I really didn't know if you would rise to the occasion, but you exceeded my expectations." James smiled, a genuine smile he hadn't felt in a long time. "It was difficult, but I realized I needed to be honest. It wasn't just about the campaign, it was about how I felt about myself. What Lucas said hit me, but instead of letting it bring me down, it pushed me to show who I truly am." Emma nodded, understanding the depth of James's words. "I think we all need moments like that, don't we? Sometimes the pressure can be so intense that we forget who we are." As they walked, James noticed that his conversations with Emma were becoming deeper. He was not only sharing his victories, but also his insecurities. Her support helped him grow, and he began to understand the value of vulnerability. In the following days, the positive energy from the meeting still lingered in the office. The campaign began to take shape, and James felt more confident working with the team. Lucas, now friendlier, approached him to discuss ideas and even offered help on parts of the project. The tension that had once existed between them began to dissipate, and James realized that mutual respect could lead to even better results. In a casual conversation, Lucas remarked, "You know, James, I realize now that your vision is really valuable. Sometimes I let myself get carried away by the pressure, but you showed me that it's important to listen and consider other perspectives. Thank you for your response in the meeting." James was surprised by Lucas's sincerity. He hadn't expected the tense interaction to lead to a new friendship. "Thank you, Lucas. I'm glad you feel that way. I believe we all have something to contribute. Together, we can create something truly amazing." These moments of openness and understanding made James feel more connected not only to Lucas but to the entire team. He began to realize that collaboration was the key to success, and that by allowing himself to be vulnerable, he was creating an environment of trust. As the campaign launch date approached, the team worked tirelessly. James felt a new sense of purpose. The challenges that once paralyzed him were now opportunities for growth. He took the time to listen to his colleagues' opinions, incorporating ideas and feedback that he would have previously ignored for fear of losing control. On the night before the launch, James and Emma met at a cafe to discuss the final details. The atmosphere was light, and the conversation flowed naturally. James said he really felt he had changed since that meeting. Before, he had let doubt take over, but now he realized that each of us has a role to play. Emma smiled, encouraging him to continue. "What you learned is so important, James. Life is made of ups and downs, and we all face challenges. What matters is how we react to them. You have become an example for all of us." James felt a wave of gratitude. He was not just overcoming his difficulties, he was inspiring others to do the same. Looking to the future, he felt stronger, more aware of his abilities, and more prepared to face any obstacle. When launch day arrived, the team was united like never before. James stood up to give a final presentation, and this time there was no fear in his voice. He spoke with passion and authenticity, and the room was filled with smiles and applause at the end. The campaign was a success, but more important than that, James had learned that true triumph lay in the relationships he had cultivated and the lessons he had learned along the way. He left the room with a new understanding. Success is built as a team, and every challenge is an opportunity for growth. With Emma by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next, confident that together they could weather any storm. After the success of the campaign, James sat at his desk surrounded by the buzz of the team. The atmosphere was light and festive, but he felt something even deeper, an internal transformation. He reflected on how he had changed since that fateful day of the meeting. He had let go of the doubts that paralyzed him and instead embraced his authenticity. That experience not only helped him conquer his fears, but also taught him to value collaboration and connection with his colleagues. As he watched Emma talk with Lucas and other team members, a smile formed on his face. The tension that once existed between him and Lucas had dissipated, and now they respected and supported each other. James realized that the true strength of a team lies in the diversity of thoughts and the willingness to listen. He had learned the importance of being vulnerable and sharing his insecurities, which created an environment of trust within his team. With the success of the campaign, James no longer felt just like an employee but like a leader. He had a new perspective on what it meant to do meaningful work. Success was not just about numbers or results, but about the relationships he had built along the way. He remembered his conversations with Emma, which always encouraged him to be better, to believe in himself, and to not be afraid to open up. That friendship had become an essential pillar in his life. In the following days, James began to get more involved with team initiatives, looking for ways to further strengthen the bonds among colleagues. He organized informal gatherings where everyone could share ideas and experiences. The team began to flourish and a sense of unity permeated the office. James felt fulfilled, seeing how his actions positively impacted the lives of his colleagues. Looking to the future, James knew there would be new challenges ahead, but now he felt prepared. He had learned that every obstacle was an opportunity for growth and that mutual support could turn difficulties into achievements. The lessons he had accumulated along his journey had made him stronger and wiser. However, what surprised him the most was the friendship he had cultivated with Lucas and the deep connection he had with Emma. He realized that friendship not only enriched his life but also served as fuel for his self-confidence and motivation. These relationships changed his worldview, making him understand that true success is not just about achieving goals, but about sharing the journey with people who inspire him. With a heart full of gratitude and hope, James decided it was time to share his experiences. He invited his colleagues for coffee, where he could hear their stories and learn from them. He wanted everyone to know that regardless of the challenges, overcoming is always possible when you have the right support. And so, he made an invitation to all who listened. Let's support each other, share our experiences, and learn from one another. Together we can face any challenge and achieve great things. James knew that this new phase of his life was just beginning. He was ready to embrace the opportunities and challenges that would come, confident that with friendship and collaboration, they could build an even brighter future. And as he looked at Emma and his colleagues, he felt that this journey was only just starting. If you have also faced challenges and found strength in friendships, share your story in the comments. Together, we can inspire one another and show that overcoming is a journey worth taking.